Very good. As I mentioned, then the basic Bible geography series is really about a set of teachings of the Bible, particularly not necessarily from a spiritual standpoint, but from a geographical standpoint, so that you can understand the geography of the steps that were taken by various figures in the Bible. I am Robinette Cross, and I wanted to let you know some things in terms of credentialing that qualify me for being able to do this teaching. I'm not just out of the middle of nowhere, but I am a social studies teacher. I've been teaching now for about 13 or 14 years. I think this coming year is my 14th year. I do specifically focus on the Middle East and North Africa. So MENA is my region. I'm also an elder, a church elder, and I have a podcast called The Firmament where I read the Bible and people are listening all over the world. I have a deep love for the Bible, but I also have a deep love for the region. And as I continue with my teaching and my studies and working with my students and students who just want to know more about scripture, one thing that I found is that they were not familiar with the locations. It's just when you're reading, like, oh, there's this far off place somewhere, but it was not exactly where. And having an understanding of the locations and the overlapping faiths that are inside of that region help give a present day understanding of why certain situations are happening, but it also lets you see the journey that these people took on foot and have a deeper understanding of scripture, but have a deeper understanding of history as well. So thank you very much for coming. We are going to start in the book of Genesis, chapter 2. And this is talking about the creation of Eden, because the main question is, well, where is Eden? If there's such a place called Eden, where is it? It doesn't exist. Well, let's talk about it just a bit. So in Genesis chapter 2, verses 10 through 14, then it says, now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became 4 river heads. So again, the core is in Eden, one river that broke off and became 4 river heads. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one which skirts the whole land of Havilah where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and the onyx stone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one which goes around the whole land of Cush. As a reminder, just so you know, Cush is in Africa, particularly North Africa. It's also known as Nubia. And so the land of Cush is right where the southern portion of Egypt is, Cush. The name of the third river is Hiddekel. It is the one which goes toward the east of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. So we have 4 specific locations that come out of, in terms of riverheads, that come out of one river location. That one river location is inside of Eden. The Tigris and the Euphrates are 2 of the mightiest rivers, which means that this area here, where you see in terms of MENA, the Middle East, and one portion of North Africa, because Egypt is also referred to as a part of the Middle East, even though it's located in North Africa. But so if we just say this is the Middle East, this region right here, please excuse me, then we'll see that we are talking about a place that is around Iraq, Syria, because this is how the Tigris and Euphrates flow. If we're talking about Cush, then that goes into Nubia, so that can cross the Nile. If we're talking about Assyria, then that also goes north and south. So the question then, when we're talking about, well, where is Eden? The truth of the matter is it's believed to be believed to be. So we cannot necessarily prove it by facts, but it is believed to be in Mesopotamia. And so Mesopotamia would include this area here, Mesopotamia. It's also known as a part of the Levant, or also called the cradle, part of the cradle of civilization. One of the main reasons it is believed to have been somewhere near there in terms of a scientific point of view or an archaeological point of view is because there is so much water. Water dictates where civilization happens. It's one of what we call the 7 pillars of a civilization, things that are absolutely necessary. And this is not just for settlements, we mean for civilizations, for whole groups of people to grow, to settle, to thrive, not just to survive, but to thrive. And one of the main things that you need is a body of living water, not just water, but living water. So we don't settle along lakes. You have to settle along rivers, because rivers have flowing waters. If you settle along waters that are stagnant, then you have bacteria, you're bound to spread things, you're bound to spread cholera, you're bound to get all kinds of stomach viruses, and there's going to be lots of things that are going to cause sickness. That also means that life is not sustained there. So it's got to be an abundance of living water. We also know that, excuse me, Mesopotamia was also home of some of the great seafarers. This is where one of the areas of some of the great trade networks in the world, the greatest trade networks in the world, actually happened. And so scientists and archaeologists say, okay, well, if we have to point out an Eden, then it would be around this region. Well, why can we not see Eden? We cannot see Eden because of the Great Fall. The Great Fall, biblically, the Great Fall happens with who? Yes, of course, Adam and Eve. And after Adam and Eve God clothed them, but he had to banish them and place them outside of Eden. Then biblically it says that there is an angel on one side, right? And then there is a shield of fire on the other side, which means that until the rapture returns, we are not going to be able to find it. It is not available to be seen by the human eye or science or archaeology. But we can have a bit of an understanding. So what are some of the countries that comprise the Middle East? I'm glad you asked. And I'm sure that some of you on this teaching may know, but in case you are not familiar with the countries that comprise the Middle East, let's get into it. Generally speaking, when we are talking about the Middle East, and this also includes information that is provided on the United Nations website, but this is what I talk about as a history instructor as well. Those countries include, let's look at the north. The northern countries are Iran, not Iran. That's actually a mispronunciation. The I portion is not pronounced in the I part is not pronounced in either Farsi or Arabic. So it's Iran, Turkey or Turkey, Cyprus. That's the northern portion of the Middle East. And if you really want to push it, then we, of course, could include Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Countries that comprise the eastern portion of the Middle East. We have a division in these countries. We have our Arab countries or Arabic-speaking countries, which are Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, not Iraq. Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. Those are primarily our Arabic-speaking countries. They are also penned now as traditionally Muslim countries. And then you have your one Jewish state. And that state, of course, is Israel, right? And so we have a tiff surrounding these countries and Israel or Israel. And there is a biblical connection to this, but we'll come back to that in just a bit of time. There's a biblical connection to this particular location that was then reinforced in the 1940s by the United Nations. The countries that comprise North Africa include, but are not limited to, so I have to say include, but are not limited to, because we're talking about regions well. And so regions include cultural connections and how people have overlapping language, linguistic and faith-based connections. So we cannot just say that they are the countries that hug the Mediterranean, right? Because if we only say that they're the countries that hug the Mediterranean, we do have a few. We have Egypt, we have Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and my home away from home, Morocco, which of course Morocco would say that's Morocco and Western Sahara or Sahara. However, when we're talking about linguistic fortitude and cultural connection, then we would also include countries like Sudan, South Sudan. We may even go down to Chad, Mauritania. Some people push it down to Niger. And then we have to look at the Horn because of that connection there. So sometimes when we're talking about North Africa, that also would include countries like Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Somalia. Because if you look at the trade connections, if you look at how close they are to Yemen, you just have the Gulf of Aden that's connected there. And biblically, Ethiopia, right, is included because the Queen of Sheba is from present day Ethiopia, and she traveled from her kingdom all the way across and up so that she could see King Solomon. So if we're talking about that, then yes, we know that we have the countries in North Africa that hug the Mediterranean. However, we have to be able to have some wiggle room when we're talking about that region. So we say Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and depending on your political stance, you would either include this entire region as Morocco, or you would say Morocco and the Western Sahara. And then we have to see some of the major bodies of water. The major bodies of water, these are not the only bodies of water, let's be clear, but some of the major bodies of water that we have, of course, are the Mediterranean, the mighty Mediterranean. We have the Red Sea. Hey there, Moses, remember him? Mm-hmm. We have the Black Sea, which is here. We have the Persian Gulf. Now, the Persian Gulf is here. The Gulf of Aden, which we just mentioned, this is that connector right here between countries in the Horn and the Middle East. The Atlantic, which I didn't include in this mapping because I'm sure we all know where that is. And then, of course, the Arabian Sea. The Arabian Sea is just here because we're talking about seafarers. Now, if we really want to push it, then we can include the Caspian Sea. But the Caspian Sea, it's between Iran, but Iran is included, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, they're all included, but the Caspian Sea often has more of a connection to European history. This region is also known as the dry world because it has a lot of deserts. Now, interestingly enough, we call this region both the cradle of civilization because there's so many waterways, but we can also call it the dry world because it is encompassed by so many deserts. There is a large concentration of deserts in the region. So of course, we have the desert in North Africa, which is called the Sahara. The reason why I put this in here is just for a little lesson right here, the word desert. Sahara means desert. So you actually don't have to say that. Because if you're saying Sahara Desert or Sahara Desert, you're just saying desert, desert. You just need to say Sahara and we're good to go. So that is this large span of desert land that crosses North Africa. That's the separator between North Africa and West Africa. It was named Sahara when Muslims were conquering North Africa because all they saw was desert. So they named it desert. Then we have the Arabian Desert, which we see here, which is, it starts in Saudi Arabia and it goes all the way into Iraq. You see it popping into little piece of Syria as well. We see some going all the way to points west. And the Arabian Desert is obviously has been converted parts of it. This is why you have places like the UAE. So Dubai, as you know, until the late 1990s was nothing but a bunch of desert land that they converted and started building on. This is a massive desertous location. You have the Syrian desert, which is connected. It has a connection to the Arabian Desert. So it's right here in Syria. And then you have the Nubian Desert. The Nubian Desert is in the southern portion of Egypt. This is around Kush. So Nubia and Kush are interchangeable. Just as a note, Kush is also a name given for Africa because Cush was the grandson of Noah, one of the sons of Ham. In relation to the rest of the world, as I mentioned, it is often called the Fertile Crescent. So see here, when I was talking about the Tigris and the Euphrates, let's see how these rivers and these waterways come together that create all kinds of good vegetation. My goodness. All right, so we have the Euphrates and the Tigris that push into the Persian Gulf. They're fed back from the Persian Gulf as well. We move over and we have the Mediterranean. That seabed then makes this area a lot more fertile. Also, the Red Sea pushes in. The Nile River is fed from and feeds into the Mediterranean. So this area right here is good and fertile. There are a lot of civilizations that are settled around here, to include Babylon, to include Ur. This is the land along the Euphrates River. This is the land of Abraham. And that's why I'm bringing this to your attention. This is the land of Abraham. So Abraham ends up having to traverse along the bed of the Euphrates. He actually goes into Egypt, comes back out from Egypt, and ends up here. That's the way that he traversed. But what makes this land so important is because it has domesticated culture. It produced the earliest integrated civilizations because of the overlapping connections that they had to make because this territory is so fertile. Established large cities and networks because they were moving up and down the waterways, and complex religious political systems. The reason why the complex religious political systems are important is because every civilization, another pillar is that they have to have some sort of religion. There has to be a raison d'être, a reason for living. How did we get here? Why are we here? So every civilization has a creation story. And so from that, you have monotheism, polytheism, you have various different deities. And inside of this area that is known as the Fertile Crescent, then not only did you have a belief in one God, right? Then you had a belief in multiple gods. And so, unfortunately, according to biblical history, then there were more people who strayed away from the belief in one God and God, the one true living God, and started to have their own entities that they believed in. So this area here became home to a lot of different polytheistic civilizations, which began to challenge and even forbid belief in one God. And that became absolutely dangerous. Now, here's the thing. Before we get to Abraham, we have a man named Noah, right? Let's go all the way back because we see, okay, well, God, you know the story of Noah. God is getting fed up with these people who have begun to turn away from him. And so he says, I'm going to flood the world. Now, prior to this, biblically, no rain had ever come from heaven. If you review the book of Genesis, then the lands were watered, the vegetation was watered from the floor bed up, because this area is so fertile. It is so full of water that it did not need the assistance of rain. So there was no rain. And then you have Noah, who begins to build the ark. And the ark is formed, and suddenly there is rain. Now, prior to this time, again, nobody had seen rain. So when it begins to rain, if you look at it, it's raining for 40 days and 40 nights. It's not the rain that's the issue, it's the flood that happens after. And this is why we know it biblically as a great flood. Well, let's take a look at it. If we're talking about the geography, imagine that there is flooding of these mighty entities, because this is the same region, all at one time. It's going to essentially wipe out everything that's living in this region because there's already so much water. And that's also why it takes a lot of time in order for that water to recede. So this is why Noah and his family had to spend a number of months on the ship after the rain had stopped. Additionally, we can cross-check this source with it's one of my favorite fictitious stories, but some people held it as true, and some of you may have read this before or heard about it, and it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a king in Ur, which is down here, right around where hundreds of years later Abraham is going to be. But he is a king in Ur, and at this time, which was the same time contemporary to Noah, that there was a massive flood that they believe wiped out the whole world. Because why? We didn't have GPS at that time. We didn't have maps of the world. So there was no real knowledge of the expanse of the world. This was for them the world, right? And so Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other subsequent stories actually overlap with the timing of the biblical time of Noah and the flood. Speaking of Noah, geography is important to understand the sons of Noah. The sons of Noah. This is before we get to Israel, and this is before we get to Abram, and who subsequently is Abraham. You've got to know the geography of how these sons repopulated the world. So we know that they come from around the Fertile Crescent, right? And then in that area, at least, all life was wiped out. We have corroborated stories that there was a massive flood that killed a significant amount of people who lived in that region. And it took months in order for the flood waters to recede, because there was already an overlap of waterways. If there was an area to be flooded, that was the most opportune one, because the flood waters just kept rising and rising. So biblically, then Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Those three sons had wives, and then Noah and his wife. So there were 8 people, 8 individuals on the ark, and then there were the pairing of all the animals. Now, once the ark was opened and then they were allowed to get off, they were supposed to repopulate. These are the ones who are responsible for repopulating the entire world. So there is a geography that is associated with these sons and their families. The importance of knowing that is knowing the geographic location. So Japheth, according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 through 5, he has 7 sons, and these sons are the fathers of Europe and Asia. These are the Eurasian populations, okay? To include, as mentioned down here, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. So then we have Ham. And this is the one that I was telling you about earlier. Ham has 4 sons, according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20. And these become the sons that father the regions of Southwest Asia, Canaan, and Africa. So they include Cush, which is Ethiopia, also widely spread known as Sub-Saharan Africa. Then you have Mizraim, which is Egypt north of Nubia. Put, which is Libya, and then Canaan, which is Palestine. All right, this is Palestine. Let's get clear, because we know that there is a current issue. There's a territorial issue with Israel and Palestine. So then you move over and you see the sons of Shem. Shem is Genesis chapter 10, verses 21 through 30. Shem has 5 sons, and these become the Middle East and the Shemites. And those sons are Elam, Ashur, which is present-day Syria. Elam is in Iran. Arphaxad, Lud, which is, and then Aram. Aram is in Syria. Here's the thing. From Shem comes the line of Abraham. So from Shem comes the line of the Israelites. Okay? The sons of Noah are the ones who go off and repopulate the world. And so the map to your right-hand side is more of a visual map so that you can see exactly where they end up. Well, how do we then get to Abraham? Well, we have to fast forward. So when fast forwarding a few hundred years in the Bible until we get to Abraham. So Noah, we know, was the first time God said, listen, I've had it with this people. I'm going to recreate. And then after the flood, God has a promise that he would no longer flood the world again to destroy it. And we have that reminder in a rainbow. It's also biblical. The rainbow is a reminder that the flood would never happen again. He didn't say I wouldn't destroy it again. He said I wouldn't destroy it by water. Now, generations have gone by, and we still have, now we have it's coming back again. The world is being repopulated. These are now the sons and daughters of those sons of Noah, and they have repopulated. Remember, the sons that are of Shem are settled now in what would be Mesopotamia, to include Abraham. Abraham is, according to the Bible, Abraham is now the only one who really still has favor with God, because people have done it all over again. They've stopped believing. They've started believing in other gods. And honestly, this area here, and I repeat it, this area here is also very much so known for polytheism. Very much so known for polytheism. Now, Abraham, who is Abram at the time, comes from right around in here. There are a number of reasons that are commonsensical, but based on knowledge of the civilizations and how people operate when their religions are challenged, there are a number of reasons why Abraham was told by God that he had to go. So Abraham is known as one of the most faithful men in the Bible, because he was living there and in what would be Babylon, and Abraham had a wife. His wife was past her childbearing years. Her name initially was Sarai, and they didn't have any children, but he did have a nephew named Lot, and his nephew was operated pretty much like his son. Abraham was well off, and he was a true believer. And Lot had a wife, and they had children, and he was a true believer, and God wanted to cover him, and God promised him that he would be the father of many nations. Well, let's look. There were other polytheistic nations around him, and so one, it would not have been safe for Abraham to stay in Babylon, because if he stayed saying that he would be the father of many nations, then he would have fallen under immediate attack. Someone would have tried to kill him and may have been successful. And also, if you're going to be the father of many nations, this is a well-populated area, you would not have the space. So he needed to have the space and the safety to populate into what becomes known later on as Israel. That's why he had to flee. Now, Abraham took his wife, and then his nephew and the nephew's wife decided to go with Abraham. Really, the nephew did. The wife just had to go. Decided to go with Abraham and Sarai, and with no real instruction, just said, go to a land where I will send you. So when we're looking at the journey, because it would be a land that's flowing with milk and honey, according to the promises of God. When we're looking at the journey, Abraham actually made it all the way over to Egypt on foot or by caravan. He started here and he had to make his way all the way over into Egypt. Why did he have to go to Egypt? He settled in Egypt for a little while as a refuge place. And this is also where he told his wife, Sarah or Sarai, act like you're my sister so that I won't get killed, because she was so pretty. And so he was afraid that the Pharaoh or the Pharaoh's guards would kill him. And so he said, act like you're my sister. And then the Pharaoh took her as his wife and laid with her and everything. And all kinds of calamities and plagues, foreshadowing, fell upon Egypt until the Pharaoh realized what happened. And he said, get out of here. Why did you not tell me that this was your wife? And now you caused me to sin and you brought great sorrow to this land. You have to go. But not only did he tell Abraham to go, he said, go and take everything that you have amassed since you've been here. Go and take everything that you've amassed since you've been here. And one of the things that fell as a part of Abraham's household right hand was a servant woman named Hagar, or it could be a G. This is going to be important. Very, very important. She was an Egyptian servant woman named Hagar, excuse me, an Egyptian servant woman named Hagar that came out of Egypt with Sarah or Sarai and Abram and Lot and their family. Okay. Remember that Sarah or Sarai was considered to be barren. And so we have to trace them back out of Egypt. Let's see. Okay. And so he reached right around in here. Sarah or Sarai was barren, and she was told she could not, well, she was told by an angel, Abraham was told by an angel that she was going to have a child, have a son. And she overheard this and like, no, that's not even possible. Clearly he wasn't talking about me. So Sarah took it upon herself to give to Abraham her servant woman named Hagar. So from that gifting of this woman, they have a son and they named him Ishmael. And so Ishmael is the first son of Abraham, not the only son, but Ishmael is the first son. So right until we get about a decade or so later, then the angel returns and tells Abraham, you and Sarah are going to have a son. And Sarah laughed. And the angel asked her, why are you laughing? She said, no, I didn't. He said, absolutely, you did. You're going to have a son, and you're going to name him Isaac. And Isaac means, so she does get pregnant, and she names her son Isaac. She names him Isaac because Isaac means laughter. Now, what happens is, because there is a promise on Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, and all the fruits of his body would father nations, that same promise has got to fall not only on Isaac, but that promise has to fall on who? Ishmael as well. So Sarah becomes jealous of Hagar and essentially tells Abraham, you got to get this woman and her baby out of here. And so Abraham banishes Hagar and his son Ishmael to the desert, where from that banishment, we have the birth that is going to lead to the bloodline of Muhammad, that's going to lead to the birth of Islam. The bloodline that leads from Isaac is leading to the birth of Judaism and Christianity. These are families that are at war because both of them have a promise that comes from the same father, Abraham. This is just so you can see, I just wanted to make sure that you had an understanding in terms of the traversing that had to happen, because it wasn't just Abraham who had to go through his routes, right? So we had to, this is actually the roots of Exodus, but I want to let you see back here. This is the root of Abraham. Isaac had to take a similar route. He actually had to do the same thing his dad did, go into Egypt, fake like he wasn't Rebecca's husband, and then come out, but he has a shorter way to go. And then you have the journey of Jacob. We have the journey of Jacob as being so big because Jacob is the one that's going to lead us, who's going to father the tribes, the sons that would become the 12 tribes of Israel, and they are going to end up in Egypt. At least initially, they stay in Egypt until Moses comes. I'm going to fast forward over this. The wilderness of Paran is where Hagar and Ishmael were initially banished, but I do want to have you have an understanding. According to Numbers 10 and 12, ch- 12, and the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran. So once they came out of Egypt, then they continued the journey that was promised to Abraham, saying that they were going to have a land that's flowing with milk and honey. Now, this is the wilderness that they had to traverse, the wilderness of Sinai. Oh, hey there are tablets that have a law on them here. They had to traverse the entirety of the terrain until they got to Israel. Now, had Sarah, this is a belief, had Sarah or Sarai been obedient, then she actually would never have given Hagar over to Abraham. But because she did, and she misunderstood, or she tried to take really fate into her own hands, this is how we have Islam. This is how we have Islam beginning in Saudi Arabia, because all you have to do is travel a bit more south, and there you are, starting in Mecca. You see this? Very easy. From the Paran Desert, and here we are. That is simple geography. And we have now in this world approximately 1.8 billion Muslims. We have a bit more than twice that amount of Christians. But we have to see, well, why is there a distinction between, or a discord between, let's say, Israel, the sons and daughters of Israel, or Christians, Muslims, and Jews? And it's because this land, the land that was allocated in 1947, by the United Nations, goes all the way back to a biblical understanding. The biblical understanding connects to the 12 tribes of Israel. And we don't have time to go through it all because this is over time with this teaching, but it's really interesting. If you ever have an opportunity, one of my favorite stories is the stories of the sister wives. And this is how we get so many children from Jacob or Israel, right? So his name becomes Israel after it's changed. Israel means he who wrestles with God. So we have Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah. And then Jacob is a twin. Jacob took the birthright and the inheritance from his brother Esau, and he had to flee. When he fled, that's when he met Rebekah, who is the one he loved the most, and her older sister, who he did not love, named Leah, but she was the most fruitful because she was the most unloved. Look at all the children she had. And Rebekah, because she was barren, gave her handmaiden Bilhah, and she bore 2 children. There was a period of time when Leah stopped having babies. So as a competition, she gave her handmaiden Zilpah to Jacob, and she bore 2 children. Again, so then Leah's womb opened back up, and this is how we have this movement: 1, 2, 3, 4. Then Rachel got jealous and gave Bilhah, so we have son 5, son 6. Then we have a pause in Leah's reproduction. So she gives Zilpah, we have son 7, son 8, and then her womb opens back up. So we have son 9, son 10. Then we have the last 2 children of Jacob, which are Joseph, well, the last 2 sons, because we have Dinah's his only daughter. We have son Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph is the one that's going to be shipped off to Egypt, and Benjamin, is the son of my right hand. This is the son that Rachel dies in childbirth having. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're clear. But there is allocated territory according to the book of Genesis, as Israel is on his deathbed, and then subsequently according to the book of Deuteronomy, by the discussion of Moses. So Moses really sets up the location, the territory of where they're supposed to be. Israel gives the anointing that's on them, but Moses determines their geography. So in Deuteronomy, we see where these tribes are actually placed because they have to have a safe placement because they have to cross the river. They have to cross the river Jordan. They have to come over and then they have to set up. And everybody can't be in the same place because they don't, they have to protect the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is with the children of Levi. If you notice, Levi has no spatial allocation. If you notice on the left map, you have Asher, you have Naphtali, Zebulun, and Issachar are half tribes because, I'm sorry, are half tribes, and then Ephraim and Manasseh are half tribes as well. Zebulun and Issachar are often spoken about together in the Bible, but Ephraim and Manasseh are tribes that you don't see because Ephraim and Manasseh are sons of Joseph. If you notice, there's no allocation for Joseph. The allocation is for Ephraim and Manasseh. These are half tribes because Joseph took these two in as his son to give as an inheritance, because what kind of inheritance was he going to give to Joseph? Joseph was second in command of all of Egypt. Got that, right? So we see, though, that they are perched and they are placed here. And the Levites, because they are the protectors of the Ark of the Covenant, these are your priests. These are the ones who protect the written and spoken word of God. They do not have a land allocation. All of the tithes that come from these tribes actually go towards helping to support the Levites. Now, this is how you get it, because inside of the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, then you have the location. You can mark it by the waters, by talking about the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Jordan, and also Moab, Edom, Philistia. So you have the geographic location to substantiate where Israel should be, which is why when we get to 1947, when Britain no longer wants to have a mandate over Israel, they turn this discussion over to the United Nations, and Israel is gets the land over Palestine. They have a reallocation of land. And this is going to start. So we see going all the way back, Israel goes back to the son Isaac. Palestine goes to the son Ishmael. They both believe they have claim over this land. And it actually says that they are going to war against each other. So in 1947, when the land gets allocated to Israel, then the sons of that are from Ishmael go to war from the 1940s until the 1970s in something called the Arab-Israeli Wars. And those wars, in some reference or some iteration or another, continue to this day. So this is why we see so much discord here, is because the United Nations, consciously or unconsciously, went by the allocation of this territory biblically and took that land from lands that were also a part of Ishmael's inheritance. We're going to take a stop here because I'm over time, and because there's so much more to talk about, there's so much more to envelop. So again, this is a series. This is just a high-level overview of the series because it's a free series. So if you want to learn more about geography and the Bible and spiritual connections, then there are longer, larger, deeper spiritual conversations that we lead, but they do have a $25 cost to them. You also get materials. So one of them that's coming up is on Friday, September the 2nd from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. A lot of the schools, the districts are closed that day because we start early now. We start school in August. And so we're talking about the steps of Moses. This is taking us through Exodus, right? So we are stopping where the Israelites end up in Egypt. And now we have to know what happens to them in Egypt and how they're going to get out. So we talk about the steps of Moses. And then we're going to jump over actually to the New Testament on September 12th, where we talk about the walk of Christ. So if you're interested in signing up for any of those classes, or then we would love to have you. You can certainly reach us. You can reach us by going to the website, crossculturaltalksllc.com. Facebook, we are on Cross Cultural Talks, or you can type in cross-cultural talks LLC. And then, of course, I'm available via email, crossculturaltalks@gmail.com, and my phone number is there as well. If you have an inquiry, that's something that you didn't think about today, feel free to let me know. I will put on my teacher hat, my world traveler hat, someone who's lived and taught in that region for quite some time as well, my elder hat, whatever I need to do in order to excavate the answer for you, I'll be happy to do that. But at the moment, I'm going to put our recording on pause to ask you, do you have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you all so very much for your time today. I appreciate it. I really hope you learned something that was meaningful to you. The upcoming classes are $25. They're not free because they are taking more time and it's a deeper dive. So the requested donation amount is $25. It really doesn't benefit me. It goes to the school. I have a global academy called the Cross Global Academy of Excellence, where we are educating students in multiple countries in the world with teachers from multiple parts of the world. So all the funds that are generated go directly to making sure that they have internet, that they have technology, and the things they need for that education. It just goes directly to them. But so yes, thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your Saturday, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Take care, and I hope you have a great day.